The holiday season is supposed to be full of cheer, not fear. It's supposed to be about spending time with family, getting together to celebrate, exchange gifts, and enjoy a meal together. For one family, evil descended upon their rural home right in the middle of their Christmas Eve celebration, and no one got out alive. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 41 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyr, and I'm here with my co-host, the one who has been on baby duty for days, because if you can't tell, I am sick with the vid, my husband, Jonathan.
Hi. Darklivity. It's the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness bring to light.
So this might be a little bit weird because I am in my set, as you can see, and Jonathan is in our set because I have COVID. So we can't be together, which has been really hard, especially not being with Mazzy. And John has taken on so much of the duties, literally. But I hope this isn't too distracting because we're going to bring you the content as usual. So let's jump in. Today, we're taking you to Carnation, Washington. It's a small city located in King County, and it's part of the greater Seattle metropolitan area, a place where life moves at a slower pace, and community means everything. It lies in the beautiful Snoqualmie Valley, surrounded by rivers, forests, and farmland, where neighbors greet one another by name, and kids still ride their bikes freely and safely to the local store. Carnation has a reputation as a quiet, idyllic place to live. The town was actually named after the famous Carnation Milk Company, which once operated in the area. It's rural, with a population of just over 2,000 people, but in some areas, the homes are separated by acres and acres of land, spread far apart. It's an appealing location for families looking to escape the bustle of larger cities like nearby Seattle. It offers a peaceful environment for raising children and living the simple life. So now that I hope you can picture this town, imagine it's right after Christmas, the day after Christmas to be exact, December 26, 2007. The only post office in town has dedicated postal workers that have been working there over a decade, and they've formed close bonds with one another. Two ladies in particular, Linda Teeley and Judy Anderson, have worked side by side all of those years, and were more than just colleagues. They were best friends. They'd actually become practically inseparable. Both in their 60s at this point with growing families in the area, they looked out for one another, and they both knew the rules of the post office. Anytime they came back from a holiday, especially one like Christmas, they were supposed to arrive much earlier than their opening time of 9 a.m. Instead, they would come in a couple hours early so they could get a head start on all the mail that had been held over the holiday when the post office was closed. Today was that day. Linda arrived just before 7 a.m., and she noticed that Judy wasn't there yet. Now, to most of us, we might just shrug it off. Maybe she got caught up, she slept in, something innocent. But to Linda, right away, she found it to be very odd. Judy had never once been late to work in over a decade, and she was always on time even after a holiday. When a few more minutes passed, Linda tried calling Judy's house, but she got no answer. She tried a few more times, and still nothing. And when 7:30 a.m. came around and Judy still wasn't there, Linda couldn't shake this bad feeling she had growing in her stomach that something wasn't right. Linda wasted not a minute more. She left the post office, jumped in her car, and sped towards her best friend's house, up in a rural area of Carnation at 1806 346th Avenue Northeast. A 9-minute drive, but one with roads that would become more and more isolated. We all need a friend like Linda. She knew in her gut that something was wrong, but she could have never imagined just how horrific it truly was.
You know you're getting close when you see the row of mailboxes at the end of 344th Avenue, right before you turn left onto the gravel road on 346th Avenue. Just past those mailboxes is the gate to the Anderson property, but this time it was locked. This immediately struck Linda as odd. If Judy left for work, the gate would be open. They only lock it when they're home for the night and not expecting anyone. It's about a 7-minute walk from the gate to Judy's house, a quarter-mile up the dirt road. With no other choice, Linda parked her car and started the uphill walk along the quiet rural road. As soon as she reached the porch, she noticed the screen door was ajar. That's when she knew something wasn't right. She pulled it open and knocked on the main door, calling Judy's name over and over, but no one answered. That's when the panic started to set in. None of it made sense. Judy wouldn't have gone anywhere without telling someone, and there were several of her family's vehicles still parked in the driveway. Linda reached out and tried the doorknob, and it turned. The door was unlocked. This made even less sense. Why lock the gate but leave the front door unlocked? Her heart was racing. Linda leaned into the doorway and called out, "Judy, it's Linda. We're worried about you." Silence. No response. And that's when her unease hit a whole new level. The living room right past the front door was the heart of the Anderson family home. It's where they'd entertain guests, unwind after a long day, and open presents together on Christmas Eve, a family tradition every year. When Linda stepped inside and made her way to the living room, the first thing she noticed was that it looked like a party. There were open food containers and half-eaten snacks scattered across the coffee table. Her eyes scanned the room, taking it all in, and that's when she saw him, a man lying on the floor. For a second, it didn't even register. She couldn't make sense of what she was looking at or who it was. But this was Judy's house, so naturally, she assumed it had to be Judy's husband, Wayne Anderson. Her mind started racing, trying to come up with an explanation. Her first thought was maybe he'd been overcome by carbon monoxide poisoning. As her eyes adjusted, that's when she saw it. The wound on his face and all the blood. It wasn't just on the man, it was everywhere. The white Christmas carpet, the one they rolled out every year, was stained with dark, jarring splashes of red. The contrast was impossible to miss. The sight of it hit her all at once, more intense than anything her mind had prepared her for.
Frantic and still not sure what happened here, Linda carefully stepped over the man's body and deeper into the living room, and that's when she noticed the woman. Semi-seated on the floor in a very awkward position, almost pinned between the love seat and the coffee table. Her head and face were covered in blood. She was slumped forward over the body of a small female child who was partially underneath her. And to the right of the woman, right above where the man was lying, was the body of a very small young boy. It was clear that sadly, none of these people were still alive. Linda sees the cordless phone. She quickly picked it up and dialed 911. When the operator picked up, she blurted out, "There's been a murder." The operator asked her, "How do you know that?" And she said that there's people dead and she's looking at them right now. Then she kept saying, oh my God," over and over again. The operator asked her to calm down. And I was thinking, calm down? In that situation, how do you calm down? Linda kept saying, "I can't believe this." And the operator then asked her what she could see. And she told her she saw a baby, a man, and a woman, and they were lying on the floor. The operator asked her if she saw any weapons nearby, but she relayed to her she did not. She then blurted out, "She's my best friend," referring to Judy, thinking that, of course, the man was Wayne and the woman was Judy. The thing was, Judy and Wayne had adult children, not little ones like the two dead on the scene. So it was a bit confusing to Linda. As a matter of fact, she explained later that in that moment, her mind actually tried to shield her from just how horrifying the scene really was. She said that her mind created images of mannequins instead of human beings scattered on the floor, which is a defense mechanism, I'm sure, to help her cope with the shock in that moment. And that's when the operator asked Linda if she knew if there was anyone else in the house, and she said she didn't know. That's actually when Linda began to get worried. I believe the operator's intention was to find out if there were any more victims so that she knew how many service vehicles and personnel they needed to send to the scene. But Linda's mind started to race with thoughts that the killer may still be there. She was panicking as she walked into other rooms of the house. Then the operator asked her a chilling question, one that I didn't expect Linda to know how to answer. She asked if the bodies were cold. Linda dropped the phone and went straight to the bodies, telling the operator to hold on, even though the operator was shouting, "No, no, no," not wanting the call to drop and wanting to make sure that she kept Linda on the line. But Linda was already by the side of the victims. And then a couple minutes later, she comes back to the line and tells the operator that she touched the adults, but she couldn't bear to touch the children. And yes, they were cold, and they looked like they had been dead for a while. She even cried out saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe the baby's dead. The poor baby."
Linda couldn't recognize the bodies at all. When she got closer, both adults were so badly wounded that they were basically unrecognizable. She was trying to figure out if it was Wayne and Judy or maybe guests or family members who happened to be there when it all happened. It just didn't make sense to her. She even told the 911 operator, "I'm not sure if the woman who's dead is Judy." Things got worse when the operator said it would take at least 20 minutes for police to arrive. Linda was shocked and she demanded to know why it would take that long, but since it was the rural part of Carnation, that was just the reality. She started to panic, thinking that maybe she could be next.
And rightfully so. After what she just witnessed, I would be terrified. And I'm actually talking to John. He's on FaceTime, so we are kind of essentially in the same room. But I mean, wouldn't you be terrified? You don't know what's going on. You don't know if there's a killer still there.
Sure, absolutely. The operator tried to calm her down, but every little noise in the house had her on edge. Still, being the loyal friend that she was, she stayed on the line until help finally arrived at her best friend's house. At one point, she even asked the operator if someone could notify her supervisor at the post office because she didn't want them thinking that she just bailed on work.
I felt so bad for Linda. She's worked at the post office for 11 years, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And here she is worried about her loyalty to her job, even in a moment like this. She said that she was worried about her mail route and that her neighbors wouldn't get their mail on time during the holidays. And I felt bad when I heard that. And we have part of this call for you. It's important that we at least hear Linda's voice and some of what she relayed to 911, so we're going to play it for you.
911, there's a murder. There's people just like I see right now. What do you see? Oh God, there's a baby and a little woman, and she's my best friend. And that's your best friend. What do you know? If you have the person that the woman is dead out there, I'm not sure it's you. Okay. And they all eat birthday?
Linda is hiding in one of the bedrooms now, and she desperately wanted out of this house. She was worried that someone would come in and kill her too. And that's when her mind shifted to terror. She had no idea when she walked in if the killer had just been in that house and if they were hiding, waiting for her to get close enough to them to strike. I can't begin to imagine that fear, thinking that you can be next. She wanted to get out of there and as fast as possible.
It took an agonizing 35 minutes for police to arrive and get Linda to safety. Even the officers were on high alert when they got there. The property was on about 6 acres of dense forested land, and with the snow falling and the cold setting in, it made everything feel more tense. They had to be extremely cautious, knowing there could be an active shooter hiding in the thick bush, possibly waiting to make a getaway. The house was fully decorated for Christmas. As the officers stepped inside, it looked like the aftermath of a holiday get-together. Presents under the tree in the hallway, Christmas decorations everywhere, a white carpet rolled out over the hardwood floor seemed to mimic snow. On the coffee table, there were snacks laid out. Cheese, crackers, dip, wheat thins, peanuts. It all felt so normal, so festive. But then there was the grim contrast underneath the table. The bodies of 4 people, bloodied and lifeless. The first victim the officer saw was an adult male. He was sprawled out in the front of the coffee table, arms stretched out to the sides and above him. He was wearing jeans, a belt, a tucked-in white shirt, and navy blue sweater over it. It was immediately clear that he'd been shot in the face, and there was also visible wounds to his abdomen. Right above him is the body of a small boy. He dressed just like the adult male, jeans and a navy blue sweater. Like they were intentionally matching for the holidays. It kind of points to who they might be, maybe a father and a son. The boy is lying on his back, leaning slightly to the right, with his arms out straight in front of him, and his knees a bit bent. He's been shot in the left temple. To his left, there's the body of an adult woman. She's wearing a white dress, shirt, and jeans. Both she and the man aren't wearing shoes, just socks, like they'd been relaxing in the living room before they were ambushed. The woman is slouched over a half-seated position, her back against the love seat. Her legs are stretched forward and one of them straddling the leg on the coffee table like she had slid down into that spot. She's still holding a little girl in her right arm. The girl's wearing a red dress with a white shirt underneath, black pants with white polka dots, and little black boots. There's blood all over the woman's shirt, but you can't really tell where she's hurt because of the way she's positioned. The little girl is almost tucked under her, and it's pretty clear she was trying to shield the child when they were shot.
It is a truly heartbreaking scene. There were investigators on this case that were tearing up while examining the scene. And even later, years later, when they had to recount these moments, they would get choked up. And I mean, who wouldn't? Most of us have families, whether we have kids of our own or we can imagine this being our parents. It is just gut-wrenching. When first responders had an idea of the approximate age of these victims, the adults were in their 30s and the children were kindergarten and preschool age. They went out to a patrol car in the driveway where Linda was sitting, and they asked her if the ages matched up to Judy and Wayne and their children. They were trying to get an identification on who these people were, and Linda said no. Judy was 61 and Wayne was 60 years old, and they had 3 adult children: 41-year-old Mary Victoria, 32-year-old Scott, and 29-year-old Michelle. And both Mary Victoria and Scott had children, but Linda really wasn't sure how many or their ages. There was a wallet on scene, and the ID matched Scott Anderson, Wayne and Judy's 32-year-old son. So the officers believed that was the adult male that was deceased in the living room, which meant the woman next to him was probably his 32-year-old wife, Erica, and the kids were their children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They wondered if this could have been a murder/self-inflicted event where one of the adults took the lives of their partner and children and then themselves. Very sad. But when they looked around, there were no weapons on scene, so that theory was quickly thrown out. When Linda is informed that they believe the family killed in the living room is Wayne and Judy's son Scott's family, it dawns on her that the Andersons have a Christmas Eve tradition. It's a dinner every year. And the last time she spoke to Judy, she was talking about having all of her kids over that night and how excited she was to cook a roast for them and open gifts together. Linda tells officers they're going to find more bodies. Now, that's a weird comment, but what she meant was that there were more family members supposed to be at the Andersons' house that night. And if Scott and his wife and kids are dead, the others are probably dead too. It was another heartbreaking moment when that realization hit her. By now, homicide detectives are on the scene as well as crime scene technicians, and this area is vast. There are a number of other buildings on this property, including a huge 2-story garage where Wayne kept his tractor and all kinds of farming equipment, a shed in the backyard, and a trailer down the road.
And sure enough, when the officers check the kitchen and open the oven, there's a burnt roast inside. But that just raised more questions. Where were Judy and Wayne? Did they really kill their own son and his family and then run? It didn't seem likely. They'd already cleared the house, so they decided to widen the search and check the outbuildings.
I think it is a good time right now for us to tell you who Wayne and Judy were. That way you will gain a lot more context as the search and investigation unfolds. Wayne Scott Anderson was born on May 31st of 1947 in Tucson, Arizona, and he grew up in Ventura, California. Ventura's sunny streets and laid-back atmosphere shaped Wayne's early years. He attended high school and college there before enlisting in the military during the Vietnam War. Wayne's time in the service reflected his strong sense of duty and his determination. On September 30th, 1972, Wayne married Judith Elaine Fisher, who was born on March 20th of 1946 in Michigan. Judy already had a 6-year-old daughter, Mary Victoria, and yes, it is a double name, and she was from a previous relationship. But when Wayne and Judy got together, Wayne adopted Mary Victoria and raised her as though she was his own daughter. And together, the 3 of them became a family.
3 years later, on October 24th, 1975, Wayne and Judy had a son named Scott Russell Anderson, giving him Wayne's middle name, Scott. 3 years after that, they completed their family with the birth of Michelle Kristen Anderson in August 1978. The family was living in California at the time, but a few years later, when Scott was 5, Mary Victoria was 14, and Michelle was just 2, they moved to Carnation, Washington. The move was for Wayne's new job at Boeing, the airplane manufacturing company that used to have its headquarters in Washington. Wayne spent 27 years at Boeing, eventually becoming a tool engineer. He was known for his hard work and dedication. Even with a busy career, he made time for hobbies like fishing, helping his kids with school projects, and sharing stories with them. He was also active in several professional engineering organizations, reflecting his passion for his work.
Judy also played a significant role in the family and the community. Shortly after moving to Carnation, she joined the U.S. Postal Service as a mail carrier. Over the decades the family lived in Carnation, she became a well-liked member of the community, known for her friendly and caring nature, and she was the type of person that knew every one of her customers' names and even their children's names. She'd remember life events and when they were coming up, everything. And at home, Judy enjoyed quilting and sewing, and she even had a dedicated craft room in the house. She also loved to cook and play the piano. But most of all, she devoted her time creating a warm and inviting household for her children and her friends. Now, let's tell them about Wayne and Judy's children.
Okay, I'll go in order of their ages. First, there's Mary Victoria. She was already a teenager when they moved to Carnation, and Wayne and Judy worried about her a lot. She was really rebellious, and she even ran away from home at 15, only after a year of living there. She would leave without warning all the time, and eventually ran off with a guy. She got pregnant really young, and then she became a single mom. Over time, though, she did settle down in North Bend, about 25 miles from Carnation. It's a town surrounded by mountains, and it gave her a chance to start fresh. Wayne and Judy still worried about her and tried to support her however they could. By 2007, Mary Victoria was 41 and had 3 sons, Ben, Terrence, and Christian.
Next was Scott, Wayne and Judy's only son. He was really an all-American guy who excelled in academics and sports growing up. He attended Cedar Crest High School in Duval, which was about 15 minutes away from their home, and one of the 2 local high schools in the area closest to Carnation. He played football, baseball, he ran track, and he wrestled, and he graduated with honors in 1994. But back in 1992, when he was just a junior, he started dating Erica Jean Mantle, who was 1 year ahead of him and attended Tolt High School, the other local high school in town. Even though she was a year ahead of him in school, they were both the same age at the time. They were 17. Erica was born April 23rd of 1975, and she was born and raised in King County, Washington, with her parents Tony and Pamela Mantle, her sister Sarah, and her brother Joe. She spent most of her teen years in the track and drill team and really enjoyed baking, so much so that when she and Scott graduated from high school, she attended Lake Washington Technical College, where she studied culinary arts and commercial baking. Erica was very creative. She even attended the Art Institute in Seattle, while Scott attended the University of Washington, earning a degree in business administration. Once they both graduated, Scott and Erica quickly found work in their respective fields. Erica was employed by QFC Quality Food Center Supermarket as an assistant bakery manager. Later, she got the job at Sporty's Bakery as a bakery manager, and she moved up to the accounting department and ended up being in charge of their payroll for the company. Erica's dream one day was to own her own bakery. Scott got a position in construction management for a pretty big company in his area, and he worked there for 7 years prior to working in heavy infrastructure contracting at Mid-Mountain Contractors in 2006. But back on Scott's 24th birthday, October 24th, 1999, he and his high school sweetheart, Erica, got married in Las Vegas, and they settled in Black Diamond, a small town with a historic and rustic feel, about 45 minutes away from his family's home in Carnation. Erica's mom, Pam, liked Scott a lot. He was hardworking, and she thought he was a great match for her daughter. The Andersons felt the same way about Erica. They had known her since she was just 17, and she truly had become part of their family. Erica and Scott had 2 beautiful children together. First, a daughter, Olivia, born on March 10th of 2002, and then little Nathan, born on December 10th of 2004.
Then there was the baby of the Anderson family, Michelle. She was 3 years younger than Scott and 12 years younger than her half-sister, Mary Victoria. Because of the big age gap, the sisters didn't really bond much until they got older. Michelle was the creative one. She loved art and would fill sketchbooks with her drawings and writings. She was the type of person who'd be quiet and shy at first, but once she felt comfortable with you, she'd come out of her shell.
And that was actually her nickname, Shell.
Michelle was really into creative writing and absolutely loved animals. She even had pet baby ducklings when she was growing up. She was super close with her brother Scott, and the two of them were practically inseparable, and she leaned on him a lot since she was more introverted and he was more extroverted and popular, especially in high school. She was a freshman when he was a senior, so having a big brother there to show her the ropes during such a big transition was a huge comfort. After high school, Michelle got a job in security and fell in love with her boyfriend Joe. They'd been together for 7 years and were planning a future together, even talking about marriage. Joe was so close to Wayne and Judy that he called them Mom and Dad, and he wanted to take Michelle's last name, Anderson, once they got married. As a matter of fact, they were planning to surprise everyone and elope on Christmas Day in 2007.
Yes, and Christmas was always a special time for the Anderson family, and it was Wayne's favorite holiday. He loved having everyone together under the same roof. Every year, the family would gather at Wayne and Judy's home in Carnation for their traditional Christmas Eve dinner, a long-standing celebration that brought everyone together. 2007 was no different. Wayne, having retired from Boeing, spent most of his time relaxing at home, while Judy, who loved her job at the post office, was still gainfully employed. This Christmas was shaping up to be another memorable gathering. The family had planned to gather around 4 p.m., ready to enjoy the festive meal and each other's company. So what happened? And where was the rest of the Anderson family members? The search extended to the other buildings on the site. Detective Kathleen Decker was assigned to the task of searching the back area of the house outside the Anderson home, while other detectives spread out to the grounds surrounding the property, a sprawling and difficult terrain to navigate. During the search, Detective Decker came across a wooden shed tucked away a few yards from the back of the home. As she made her way up to the shed, she noticed a very oddly placed green-colored outdoor kind of astroturf carpet in front of the shed door. And it was obvious that there was something large underneath it because the lump that she could see. It was an outline that looked like it could be another body.
She radioed for assistance, and when she and the other detectives pulled back the carpet, they found an adult male lying in a very unusual position. He was face down with both arms tucked underneath him and his legs tangled. He was wearing a white undershirt, but his jeans and underwear were down around his ankles. He wasn't wearing any shoes, just socks, and it was clear that he had suffered a head wound. Detective Decker noticed that shed door was slightly open, so she focused on it and carefully pulled it back to take a look inside, and right away she spotted a pair of feet wearing white socks. As she got closer, she saw it was a body of an adult woman dressed in bloody jeans and a navy blue sweater. She had wounds to both her head and chest. This was Judy Anderson. They had just found her and Wayne Anderson, both dead with no weapons near either of them. It was clear this wasn't self-inflicted. Someone had killed 6 members of this family, but what stood out about Wayne and Judy was the lack of blood where they were found. Even with their severe gunshot wounds, there was no blood around the shed or on the ground outside. It was clear they hadn't been killed there, they'd just been moved, almost as if someone was trying to hide them. This was different from the other victims who seemed to be ambushed and left in plain sight. It was a crucial detail in understanding the crime and piecing together the sequence of events.
Detective Decker knelt down, looking at Wayne's socks. They were clean. He couldn't have walked on the ground outside without getting them dirty, so she knew that something wasn't right. His shirt, however, was stained with mud, dirt, twigs, and grass. It looked as though he had been dragged through the yard. And as they looked at the ground from where Wayne's body was to back where the back door of the house was located, they saw clear drag marks, which measured about 18 inches wide. Wayne had clearly been pulled across the ground, and these markings on his shirt confirmed it. That's also why his pants and underwear were down, because they slid down his body as he was being dragged. Judy's socks were also clean, and so was her clothing. It appeared that she had actually been carried from the home and placed into the shed. There were definitely a lot of questions to answer, but one thing was for sure. Whoever did this had to be strong enough to carry Judy's body and to drag Wayne across the yard lifeless. It's a very heavy person to do that. The investigation into these murders of 6 members of the Anderson family was escalating into a massive, multifaceted crime scene. Every detail was being scrutinized. How had 6 members of one family ended up dead on Christmas Eve. It was lead homicide detective Scott Tompkins' job to figure that out. When he got on scene, he interviewed Linda, who was still there, hoping to gather any additional details that might help them in the investigation.
Linda said that along with Scott, Erica, and their kids, Wayne and Judy had also invited their daughters, Mary Victoria and Michelle, to Christmas Eve dinner. Worried that Mary and Michelle might be victims of the massacre too, a search for them started right away. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, the CSI team talked with medical examiner's office about keeping the bodies of Scott, Erica, Olivia, and Nathan in place while they collected evidence inside the house. The medical examiner's office agreed, knowing how important it was not to disturb the scene.
And it was really sad because inside Judy's craft room, there was wrapping paper that was used to wrap Christmas gifts, and there was even a toy truck that was still unwrapped and lying on the floor of that room. It looked as though Judy might have been in the middle of wrapping gifts when this crime occurred, but there wasn't any blood inside that room in particular. Under the tree so far, there were 4 wrapped gifts with name tags on them. 4 of them said Nathan, 4 said Olivia, and 1 said Michelle. Now, moving back to the living room, the fact that all 4 victims lying in there had been shot, there was a significant amount of blood around them. To analyze the blood spatter, the State Patrol Crime Lab was called in to conduct a reconstruction based on where the blood was and what type of stains were left behind. It was all over. It was on napkins, a Planters peanut can lid, boots under the table, a leather armchair, the couch, the love seat, the walls, drapes, floor, TV. You get the picture. Everywhere. For one, it would need to be swabbed. And depending on whose blood was where, that could determine where they were when the shots were fired. The scene was chaotic. There was no forced entry, though, and it appeared that nothing had been stolen, ruling out a robbery as the motive.
Investigators had already found 2 different types of shell casings, a 9mm and a .357 Magnum. Both are popular and easy to get handgun cartridges, but they're very different. This suggested that more than one gun was used in the crime, meaning that there might have been 2 killers.
However, there was another interesting clue that Linda provided. She said that it was odd that the gate to the property had been locked. The Andersons would have that gate unlocked on Christmas Eve so that their guests could arrive, right? Because they were expecting their family members to come over, which means someone locked the gate after they killed this family, probably hoping that it would be harder for someone to stumble upon what they had done. So this led investigators to believe the killer or killers must have been familiar with this property and or the Anderson family. This killing seemed personal. Murdering 3 generations of someone's family is deeply disturbing. Somebody knew that they would be gathered there that day. It's almost as though they wanted to take out as many members of this family as possible all at once, which is just sickening.
What was weird is that there weren't any bloodstains where Wayne and Judy were killed. You'd expect to see pools of blood where their bodies were before they were moved, but investigators couldn't find any. When the bloodstain analyst showed up, they confirmed that those stains were basically missing. So they decided to use leucocrystal violet, LCV, which is kind of like luminol. It reacts with blood and makes it turn violet, even if it's not visible to the naked eye. They sprayed it around different areas of the house and it lit the dining room up right next to the living room. There was a smear on the floor like someone had been dragged, and it led to the back door. They also found more blood in the kitchen, which is next to the dining room.
What was so interesting was that it appeared a cleanup had been attempted in both of these other rooms. So why not the living room? The killers obviously took the time to hide both Wayne and Judy's bodies and to clean up the areas where they were killed. So did they just run out of time and leave the rest of the family just lying in the living room? Or was there another reason? There were distinctive shoe patterns in the blood and on the back of Wayne's white shirt, left there in mud, indicating that someone stepped on his back at some point. And these shoes had 3 small circles in the center of the sole. And then there was a distinctive set of shoe prints that had like an angled groove on the side of them. And these prints led from places like the back door to the shed and through the blood in the house as well. More evidence that there were 2 killers involved. When they sprayed the LCV in the bathroom and in the kitchen, a story emerged. In the bathroom, there was a lot of blood near the toilet. It was as though evidence had been flushed, and also a lot in the tub around the drain. There were tracks and tracks of boot prints in and out of this area, further indicating a cleanup and disposal of evidence of bloody napkins, paper towels. Maybe they squeezed out sponges in the toilet and in the tub. There was also a bullet found in the laundry room and a hole in the wall that led to the kitchen. And they realized that this bullet came through the kitchen. So they make their way in there and they spray more LCV. And on the fridge, it looked like there was blood smears as though someone had used a sponge to wipe it down. And the LCV lit up the floor in front of the refrigerator as well. They could tell a huge pool of blood had been there. So they decided to move the fridge away from the wall. And when they did that, it exposed the rest of the blood, still on the floor, hidden by the fridge. So this was a very sloppy cleanup job. However, there were no blood-soaked paper towels, no mops or other cleaning supplies found in the home, which added to the mystery.
They figured out that the murders probably happened on Christmas Eve. It made sense since that's when Judy and Wayne were expecting their adult kids and grandkids to come over and celebrate. So the investigators had a hunch and reached out to the police department to see if there had been any 911 calls from the Anderson house on December 24th. And it turns out there was one. It came in at 5:13 p.m., about an hour after the family expected their guests to arrive, but the call had only lasted 11 seconds. The operator picked up, and all she could hear was the faint sound of what might have been voices in the background.
It was the holiday. Calls like this are not uncommon. Little kids getting a hold of a family phone, people accidentally pushing a preset emergency number. There's a lot of reasons. So the dispatcher thought it sounded like a party, which was typical for Christmas Eve. But she didn't just disregard it. No. She actually tried calling back 2 times with no luck. But she didn't stop there either. She actually dispatched an officer out to that location that the call was routed from.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
The officers assumed the noise was just part of a holiday celebration. When they got to the Anderson property at 5:45 p.m., they found the gate locked, which blocked them from getting in. Because of Washington state's privacy laws, they didn't have the legal right to go past the gate or head up to the driveway. So they couldn't check things out. They cleared the call and left.
If the gate was already locked by 5:45, that meant the killers had left by then. Now the investigators had to work backwards to figure out when and who was killed first. This call, even though it seemed innocent at first, raised investigators' interest, and they wondered how it could be connected to the crime.
While all this was happening, officers were headed to Mary Victoria's home in North Bend to deliver the death notification and make sure that she and her kids were safe. They had already called her and she answered from her house, so they knew that she was okay at that moment. But since it seemed like her family had been targeted, they wanted to check on her safety and also talk to her in case that maybe she was somehow involved. When they told her the devastating news, she was visibly shaken. Her parents, her brother Scott, her sister-in-law Erica, her niece Olivia, and nephew Nathan had all been found murdered. Mary Victoria was heartbroken and in total shock. She explained that she was supposed to be at her parents' house that night, but one of her sons wasn't feeling well, so she decided to stay home and avoid spreading the illness.
Can you believe that? This poor woman. She can't believe what happened, and she could have been killed as well. I mean, she was supposed to be at that family party, and if it wasn't for her son getting sick, she would have been there. So can you imagine just like going through that in your head when you're getting this notification?
Right, I feel like we hear stories about this all the time. I should have been there. Mary Victoria told the police that she had just spoken to her mom the day before on Christmas Eve. Judy and Michelle were at Target picking up some last-minute Christmas gifts for the kids. From the background, Michelle asked Mary if she was going to be there the next day for the family get-together. Mary said yes, and told her mom that she loved them. She mentioned she'd try to make it even though her son wasn't feeling well. She was excited to see everyone.
Wow, and her children confirmed her story. But of course, that wasn't the most solid alibi. But at this point, the detectives had a lot more to investigate before confirming anyone as a suspect. But they were hoping that Mary Victoria could provide more information about her family and anyone that may have wanted to harm them.
So while the investigators were handling that, the officers had a difficult task of notifying Erica's parents about the heartbreaking news. That's a notification no one would ever want to make. Their daughter, her husband, their entire family, including the 2 young children, were all dead.
There's no way that I can even relate. Even as a mother, just thinking about an entire family gone just like that on a holiday is just unimaginable. Erica and Scott had been together for 17 years when they were killed. She was essentially losing a son and a daughter and 2 grandbabies all at once. And Erica wasn't just Pam's daughter. They were best friends. They spoke every single day. And the last time she spoke to her was actually on Christmas Eve, 3 times to be exact. Erica was actually doing some last-minute Christmas shopping. She had actually taken time off work to prepare for the holiday season that year. She respected the Andersons so much, and she knew how much it meant for the whole family to get together. Erica spoke to her mom, Pam, at 10 a.m., then at 1:30 p.m., and the last time was at 3:30 p.m., right before they were leaving to go to the Andersons for dinner. They planned to get there at 4. It had been a day and a half since Pam had heard from her daughter when she started to wonder what was going on. She even drove over to Scott's work, and they told her that he hadn't shown up that day. She thought that was very odd, but by the time she got back home, officers were waiting to tell her the news.
As you can imagine, it was absolutely devastating. Once she managed to calm down, she shared the information Kimbyr just told you about. There was more to come, but right now the family was in deep grief, and on top of that, 2 people were still missing and could be in danger: Michelle Anderson and her boyfriend Joe. Investigators had cleared every building on the Anderson property except for a single-wide trailer down the road at 1910 346th Avenue. Linda mentioned that about a year ago, Wayne and Judy were so happy to see Michelle and Joe doing so well that they offered the couple the trailer to live in at the edge of their property. It was meant to be a place that they could call their own, somewhere they'd have privacy and could save money for the future. But there was a problem. The trailer was already occupied by the former landowner's adult son, Buck, who had refused to move out when the Andersons took over the property more than 20 years earlier.
Well, Wayne wanted his daughter to move in, so Buck finally had to go. And of course, he wasn't happy. Apparently, this man was kind of unhinged, and he refused to leave the trailer until Wayne and Judy had to get a lawyer involved. But eventually, Buck did move out, but there was still a lot of tension apparently between him and the Andersons. And this looked like it could be a potential motive. The detectives began to wonder if Buck, still holding a grudge, might have returned to settle old scores with Wayne, and whether Scott and his family had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time and caught up in the crossfire.
Detective Tompkins approached Michelle and Joe's trailer with caution. He and a team of officers surrounded the building. Tompkins knocked on the door, but there was no answer. However, he thought he heard movement inside, so he decided to breach the threshold and force their way into the trailer.
Now, this was not a big home. They could tell right away it was empty. There's no blood anywhere. There's nothing that suggested foul play. However, it is very messy, almost uninhabitable. And they were surprised that Linda actually thought that Michelle and Joe had been living in there because it was a disaster. There's a bunch of garbage inside, old food rotting away. They even found a dead bird. It was like absolute filth. Something wasn't adding up. But before detectives had a chance to investigate further, they were alerted that the Andersons' 29-year-old daughter, Michelle, and her boyfriend, Joe, had just pulled up to the scene. Detective Tompkins hurries to gather his team to shield Michelle from what's inside the home, and of course carry out a death notification. But as Michelle's black S10 truck is pulling up the driveway, one of the local officers remembered something. Recall the 911 call that came in on Christmas Eve? The one where the officers were dispatched but the gate was locked? Well, as they were driving up the road that leads to that gate on the Anderson property, they had noticed one vehicle coming from that direction, meaning coming from the road that led to the gate, which we know ended up being locked. This was just before 5:45, just before they had a chance to pull up and realize that the gate was locked. The vehicle was a black S10 truck, but at the time, they didn't think it was an important detail, so they didn't look at who was driving. But now the same vehicle is pulling up to the scene. So this added a new layer to the investigation. If Michelle was driving that truck and it was the same truck from the night of the murders, and it came from the locked gate, and she likely had a key to the gate, then that meant she locked it, which meant she could be the killer. Damn. And I mean, it is adding up, but still, they have to keep in mind, this could also be an innocent person, a family member, an innocent reason that she was coming out of that location. So they can't just jump to conclusions. Just because she was coming from the house doesn't mean that she committed the murders. She's a family member. They still had to respect that fact and do their due diligence in the event that they could be completely wrong. They had just started this investigation. It was only 11 a.m., just hours from when they found these bodies inside. So they had not done a thorough analysis on any of the evidence yet, so they proceeded with caution, but with the understanding that this could be a suspect, that Michelle and Joe could be their prime suspects. There's 2 of them. There's 2 different kinds of shell casings found on the scene. The math was mathing, as they say. Even though it's cringy, it's catchy.
Detective Tompkins walked towards Michelle as she came up the driveway, and he met her partway and guided her to his unmarked Impala. They both got in, Michelle in the passenger seat and Tompkins in the front, and Detective Sue Peters in the back. The interview was recorded with Michelle's permission. She didn't even ask what was happening, just sat there with her hands in her lap, staring blankly out the window.
While Michelle is being interviewed by Tompkins, Detective Pavlovich took Joe aside in his vehicle where he was talking to him, and that conversation was also being recorded since it had now been relayed to the detectives that Joe and Michelle could be suspects, so they don't want to miss anything.
Detective Tompkins started out by asking Michelle what her family's plans were for Christmas Eve. What's wild is that Michelle hadn't asked what was going on at her parents' house, even with the whole scene right in front of her. There's crime scene tape everywhere, helicopters overhead, the crime scene trucks, news vans, and officers all over the place. She didn't say a word about it. This isn't something you'd see every day, especially in a rural area like this. Michelle explained that her parents always celebrated Christmas Eve with the kids, so she had stopped by that day to say hello. She and Joe were supposed to be headed to Vegas on Christmas Eve to elope because, as she put it, they were getting married finally. But instead, they decided to come back and surprise her family.
Right. And what's interesting, like you said, she hasn't asked anything. And she also assumes that the officer knows her family history, like the family dynamic, like who are the kids that she's referring to. It's very odd. It's very confusing and weird. And then it's also discombobulated. Like the timeline is off because she's like, well, we started to go to Vegas, but then we had to turn around because I forgot my wallet. It's like, girl, it has been 2 days. You're just coming back from forgetting your wallet, and now you don't even ask what's going on here. Now, we have parts of this interview, and we are going to be playing some of it for you so you can really understand how Michelle sounded. So let's play a part now.
What were the plans for the day on Christmas Eve?
Well, they celebrate Christmas Eve with the kids, and I just wanted to come up and say hi because we were going to surprise everybody with kids and their family. So we're just going to go out, and I start driving down to Vegas.
Okay.
But I forgot my wallet.
Meanwhile, in Joe's interview, he pretty much starts out by saying the same thing, that Wayne and Judy are fine, that him and Michelle went over to say hello on Christmas Eve, and then they went on that drive to Vegas to get married. And now they've come back, and now there's all this commotion happening. So it kind of added up to what Michelle told them, except Michelle said that it was a surprise. And Joe said that they told Judy and Wayne, who he refers to as mom and dad. He explained that he moved out there about 5 or 6 years ago, and he initially met Michelle online and moved from North Carolina to be with her, and he considered the Andersons like his own family. What the investigator can gather at this point is that he seems like he's got a little bit of a speech impairment, almost making him seem a lot younger than 29 years old. So let's listen.
So you guys decided to elope and go off to Vegas?
Yeah.
Did you tell anybody?
We told Wayne and Judy. We wanted them to know because it's my dad. I mean,
How long have you known Michelle?
I came out here somewhere between 6 to 5 years ago. No, I met Michelle online.
Back to Michelle's interview. Detective Tompkins asked if she had checked on her parents during her drive to Vegas, or if she called them on Christmas Day to wish them a happy holiday or anything like that. She said no, explaining that she doesn't usually talk to them that much.
She doesn't usually talk to them much, but she lives on their property. It's just kind of weird. And the detective is still thinking that he has to make this death notification. He's trying to be careful, but he's also realizing that she's not asking any questions. It's like she doesn't even care that something catastrophic could have happened to her family. So he decided to probe her about what she thought all the commotion was.
And normally, Tompkins would be really careful in a situation like this, especially when dealing with a family member. He tried to break the news as gently as possible, but Michelle was so stoic, almost uninterested, that he started with really simple, almost childlike questions. He said things like, "You and your family live in a really quiet area out here, don't you?" And she just said, "Yeah." Then he said, "It's kind of country out here." And again, she just said, "Yeah." Trying to get some kind of reaction out of her to the commotion, Tompkins asked, "When you pulled up, what did you see?"
Her answers were so weird. She was like, "I saw a row of cars in a van with a funny looking thing on top." And it's really not funny. And Tompkins was like, okay. Yeah, the media's out there. Because she's talking about like the news van. It's like, what are you talking about? And he goes, "Did you see any sheriffs?" And Michelle said she didn't know. And all the while, you can hear a chopper flying above them. This is a 29-year-old woman. And she's sitting there like she's oblivious to what's going on. Clearly, he's getting the hint that Michelle, how can I put it? Like she's not really all there. She's a little bit off, maybe slow. And he thought that she could be on drugs. She's very calm, almost in an eerie, childlike way, like you said. Like it's almost like a toddler. And it's very frustrating when you're dealing with a massacre because all they want is answers. This was her family. You would think she would drive up like, "Oh my God, what's going on? My family's in there. Are they okay?" But no.
She just proceeds to ask if her car had been stolen or if there'd been a fire there.
Yeah, she said the last time she saw cars like that was a few years ago when they had a fire.
You ever seen this many police cars in one place at one time?
When the house was on fire.
Have you seen one fire truck since you've been here?
And they're frustratingly going back and forth with the small talk and the dumb questions for a while until finally the detective is like, "Are you at all concerned about your family?"
Are you at all concerned about them?
Yeah.
Unreal. And at this point, he's like blatantly asking her, "Why haven't you asked me about your family? You see that I'm wearing a sheriff's uniform. Don't you think I would know the answer to that question with everything going on here?" She didn't answer. She was just sitting there picking at the skin on her knee.
And finally, Detective Tompkins says, "Michelle, is there anything you want to tell us?" And she just goes, "Well, my dad might have had a heart attack." But she says it like she's not even sure, almost like she's guessing.
Yeah, it's like she was asking a question, like she's wondering, what am I supposed to ask him? And it's obvious that she's not right in the head. And it's also obvious that she has something to do with this crime. To Tompkins, as experienced as he was, he knew in that moment that he was looking into the eyes of a killer. And knowing that would be a mixture of terrifying, but also exhilarating because you're probably just minutes away from understanding at least part of what happened in that home. And that would be a huge step in the right direction in solving this case.
Detective Tompkins asked her if she would ever harm her family, and she said no. And then he asked her if she would ever cover for someone who did, and she also said no.
Would you ever harm your family?
No.
Did you ever cover up for somebody who did?
No.
Right. And he's asking her this because, again, they don't know whether maybe Joe did this and she's protecting him. They have no idea. They're just trying to get something out of this woman. And meanwhile, Joe also hasn't asked anyone what's going on. And Detective Pavlovich finally asked him if he has any idea why they're there. And he's like, "I don't know. I really have no idea."
Do you have any idea why we're here right now? Why the police are here?
I don't know. I really have no idea.
Something's happened up at the house.
And that's when the detective finally lets him know that something's happened at the Anderson home. And at the same point in the investigation, other detectives are doing recon and research. They're reaching out to people who knew the Andersons, people who knew Michelle and Joe. They want to know who they're dealing with. What's their story? How did they get together? So the team of investigators are calling around to gather that information to put together a profile of Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe. And right away, Linda actually said that right when she noticed the gate was locked, Michelle popped into her mind because she knew that Michelle would have a key to the gate. She also knew that Michelle had been causing issues for some time with her family, especially in the last year with her parents. She explained that Judy had told her there were outbursts that Michelle had over her parents telling her and Joe that they were required to pay rent after living in the trailer rent-free for an entire year. They were both 29 years old, and it was about time they grew up and moved on with their own lives. So I think we should tell you everything that these detectives gathered about who Michelle and Joe were.
We already told you about Michelle growing up, and she was the baby of the family, the last of the Anderson kids, and her older siblings always looked out for her. But she was especially close with her brother Scott. The thing is, remember how Scott met his future wife Erica back in high school in 1992 when they were both 17? Well, Michelle was only 14 at that time, right in the middle of that tough transition into high school. She leaned on Scott a lot for support, but suddenly there was someone more important in his life, Erica.
From the beginning, Michelle was extremely jealous of Erica in an unhealthy and a very unnatural, very weird way. Almost as though she was angry her brother loved someone other than her, that he was spending his time with someone other than her, giving attention to Erica, putting her first. And Michelle wasn't having it. She had always been the most important girl in her brother's life, and now she seemed to be pushed aside. Soon, everyone loved Erica. Her parents were now complimenting her on how talented she was and how artistic she was. And those were things that Michelle had always tried to be. Erica now took center stage. She was coming to all their family events, even their special Christmas Eve dinners, the ones that they used to spend as a family, the ones that used to be dedicated to the Anderson children, getting gifts and spending time together. But now there was this imposter sitting next to her brother as he sat in his favorite spot on the left side of the couch in the living room. Erica was now in Michelle's spot, and there was no room for Michelle anymore. Erica and Scott would be hugging and kissing, sitting in each other's arms, and Michelle felt all alone. As years passed, things only got worse as Erica and Scott excelled in college and ended up getting married. Michelle knew that Erica wasn't going anywhere. And honestly, Michelle wasn't either as far as going anywhere in life, that is. She wasn't progressing in her career or in college. Instead, she would spend countless hours in front of the computer on AOL in chat rooms, talking to strangers with her head in a notebook, creating fantasy stories about things that she probably dreamed that she could be and do without ever trying to get out and make something of herself.
I mean, sure, Michelle worked simple jobs here and there, but her brother Scott always seemed like the golden boy, the perfect child their parents were so proud of. But the ultimate slap in the face came when Michelle found out that Scott and Erica were having a baby. Suddenly, Michelle wasn't the baby of the family anymore. She wasn't mommy and daddy's little princess. That title went to little Olivia. And after Olivia, it was Nathan. From then on, Christmas Eve at the Andersons were all about the grandkids.
Yeah, Michelle was dethroned. She wasn't the little princess of the family anymore. And Michelle's older sister, Mary Victoria, sure, she had children, but that was different. Remember, she was a single mom. She was rebellious. She wasn't looked at the same way as perfect Scott and Erica, who did everything right.
Michelle started falling into a deep depression and threw herself deeper into her online world. That's where Joseph McEnroe comes in. Back in the early 2000s, when AOL chat rooms were a big thing, Michelle joined a writers group where people shared their fantasy stories. And that is where she met Joe. She was drawn to his stories about heroism, magic, and fantasy, and they mirrored her own love for imaginative worlds and gave her the sense of an escape that she desperately needed.
Yeah, because her life was so hard and terrible. I'm being sarcastic. I mean, this is a girl who came from this beautiful family. She had 2 caring parents who supported their children even when they didn't make the best choices. They were there for them. And she could have had a happy, growing family herself, like her own brother did. And sure, he was doing well in life. He met someone, he fell in love, he started a family. But instead, here she is wallowing in her own self-pity. But go on.
To Michelle, Joe's stories felt like a portal to another world, a place where real-life struggles disappeared. They sparked her creativity and made her feel seen in a way that few people ever had. For Joe, engaging with Michelle gave him the validation that he'd been craving. Her excitement about his stories made him feel valued and appreciated. and maybe for the first time. He was a loner too and hadn't had that kind of upbringing Michelle had, so he really latched onto her. Her encouragement boosted his confidence, and before long, he started seeing their connection as something more than just riding buddies.
Yeah, and sadly, as John mentioned, Joseph McEnroe's childhood was not like Michelle's. It was marked by instability and physical trauma. He grew up in a home with his mom who physically and verbally mistreated him. She often manipulated her own parents for money, and she would use little Joseph as leverage in her schemes. So this poor kid was a bargaining chip, a pawn in his terrible mother's selfish games, and apparently the household was chaotic, with various men constantly coming and going, none of whom Joe had a good relationship with and who were not good influences at all. Joe recalled several traumatic experiences. One included a man that attempted to drown him in a bathtub, and another one forced shaving cream down his throat. Wow. And he never even knew his own father. And according to reports, one of the homes was filled with infestations of lizards and scorpions in California. And I have to say, I do like lizards. Scorpions, that's a no. But depending on how many lizards we're talking about here, but you can see the sharp contrast, all jokes aside, between Michelle and Joe's past.
Some kids find comfort at school, even if things are rough at home, but this wasn't the case for Joe. School wasn't any better for him. He had a hard time making friends and spent most of his time alone, hanging out in AOL chat rooms, looking for some kind of connection. That's where he met Michelle Anderson, about 7 years before the murders. At that time, Joe was living in North Carolina and Michelle was in Washington. Their conversation started off simple, with Michelle complimenting his stories like we mentioned before. For Joe, who was in his early 20s and had little experience with women, that attention felt magical. It was like he and Michelle were soulmates. They started talking more, and before long, their online relationship took on a sexual element.
And some of you may be of the age to remember this, but in the early 2000s, before social media was everywhere, nobody exchanged pictures. It was all about just talking and getting to know one another. Some of that seems kind of good nowadays, but Joe had no idea what Michelle actually looked like. When he asked her for a picture, all she would send were old photos from high school, and to him, she appeared to be slim and athletic, and she even described herself as a Linda Hamilton type from the Terminator movies. So Joe sent Michelle a few recent pictures of himself. He is a thin dude with brown eyes and long brown wavy hair past his shoulders. He kind of reminded me of like a band dude, like someone who listens to rock, and I love you, babe, but I'm kind of describing you with the long hair and that's what I mean. He just kind of looked like a rocker. I don't know. We're going to put a picture up on the screen of what he kind of looked like. He also kind of reminded me of Charles Manson. Ugh.
I have played in a band before.
I know. And he looked like a band dude, and he probably wore like rocker shirts. But finally, Joe became frustrated because he wanted to see what Michelle looked like. So he actually bought her and sent her a digital camera so that she could actually take a current picture of himself. And when she did send him something, it was a close-up of her cleavage. She like pushed her chest together, formed a lot of cleavage, so maybe he would, pay attention to what's down here. And she also would send him a close-up of her eyes. And she did have these big, beautiful, sparkling blue eyes. And those eyes alone fascinated him. It was enough to keep him interested. So over the next few months, the relationship began to grow deeper and deeper, mostly through late-night chats and video games. And eventually, after only 6 months of chatting, Michelle convinced Joe to leave his home in North Carolina and move to Washington to be with her. She even told him it would be easy since her mom worked at the post office. He could literally just send all of his belongings through the mail, and Judy would take care of the rest. He finally agreed. He had all of his belongings shipped out to Michelle's parents' house with their permission, and he hadn't even seen Michelle yet. He saw her for the first time when he got to the airport, when she came to get him. And when he arrived in Carnation, he was in for a surprise. Michelle didn't look anything like the woman that he had imagined. She wasn't exactly unattractive to him, but he said in his words that she was bigger than he thought from what she described, and she was plain, even a little mousy looking, and a bit disheveled. In all the pictures, she would wear this elaborate and creative makeup, but now she was barefaced, wearing dirty clothes, like she made zero effort to impress him. But in his words, he loved her for who she was, not her size. She was also a clown, literally. She was working as a face painter for kids' birthday parties. She would twist up the balloons and things like that. It wasn't exactly the hot chick that Joseph had been dreaming about, but he was already there. So he decided to give her a shot.
And that was one of his biggest mistakes.
What, taking a chance on Michelle?
Well, sight unseen, not knowing much about her outside of the internet.
Yeah, and of course, her being secretive about the way she looked. But looks aren't always everything. They're not always indicative of a person's character. And actually, at first, Michelle was very sweet. And she was thrilled that she finally had a relationship that she'd been dreaming about. A stable, long-term relationship like Scott and Erica. That's what she wanted. And Joe's attention gave her the security that she was craving. And for his part, Joe felt validated by her constant affection. It was the first time that someone truly accepted him, flaws and all. He had been catfished a number of times online by women who would talk to him for months, and they turned out not to be who they said they were. This was the best he had ever found. As soon as he got there, he started working at a Target because he actually transferred to a Target. He was already working at one back in North Carolina. And they moved into an apartment that Michelle was already living in at the time. It wasn't the nicest area, and Michelle was perpetually scared for her safety, to the point where she actually designated Joe as what they referred to as her guardian. He said he wasn't a warrior. That's someone who goes out looking for trouble. Instead, he tried to prevent it. And you have to remember, not all of us think like Joe and Michelle. They're like fantasy geeks.
They would write notes to one another back and forth every day in the notebook in the apartment when they went for work. And as we progress, you'll start to understand why their relationship seemed a bit, odd. To some, the note writing would seem a bit childish, but honestly, you and I write little notes and leave them in secret places to be discovered in the future.
Yeah, I hope I get a few of those soon. I haven't done one in a while, I will admit, but we do like writing cute little notes, but this wasn't like that, okay? It sounds cute, but this is a little bit different.
It was what was in the notebook that stood out. Pages filled with "I love you so much" over and over, which is pretty standard for a couple who is in love, but there was also Pokemon references and Michelle signing off as Shelly Girl. But here's where it gets odd. The concerning parts were her paranoia. She was convinced that people were trying to attack them and had Joe believing it too. She claimed people were trying to crawl up their balcony even though they lived on the 3rd floor. Her fear got so bad that Joe was designated to sit in front of their sliding glass door with a sword to protect her.
Yeah, and if you think this is crazy, I wish you could know every detail of this case, but it would probably be a 3.5-hour video or more. And at first, Scott, Michelle's brother, was actually worried about who this guy was. You know, she'd been talking to him for just a few months. He flies all the way there, starts living with his little sister. He was very protective of Michelle, and he wanted to know if Joe was stable, reliable, safe. And over time, as he came around and he met with the family, they liked Joe.
And actually, Joe really liked the Andersons. He got along great with Wayne and Judy and was very grateful for their loving nature. He actually called them Mom and Dad because he really felt like they were a family to him.
Exactly. Wayne and Judy gave him something his own parents had not: stability, care, and acceptance. In a way, they filled the gap that had been left there in his life, offering him the parental support that he always craved. Finally, Wayne and Judy even offered them a single-wide trailer on their property to live in so they could save money and plan for their future. But of course, about a year into this, Michelle and Joe were living at Wayne and Judy's, and they started to kind of mooch off them even more. When Michelle decides to quit her job, Joe was forced to quit his from Target because he did not drive, and there were no Targets out in rural Carnation. They were almost 30 years old, and frankly, enough was enough. Joe would spend all of his free time on the computer, Michelle would be playing video games or watching TV, and Judy and Wayne put their foot down. They probably had been telling them this for a while, that they kind of needed to figure their life out and know what they were going to do next. And that's when, at the very least, they offered them the trailer on the property. Well, they completely trashed it. I mean, you heard what the investigators saw. There were dead animals inside of it. It had garbage everywhere. They destroyed it. They had zero respect for Wayne and Judy. Instead, Michelle felt like her parents and even her brother owed her something. With Scott, it was the fact that he had promised at one point to help her fix up a really old Firebird. It was like from the 80s that was sitting at his house in the driveway. He loved to do stuff with cars as they were growing up, but life changed. He had a small baby. His wife was pregnant at the time, and it got a little hectic. He couldn't spend all of his time putting a new engine in this old vehicle, even though he tried. And apparently she had given him some money to take care of the expenses for the car. But what he found out was that he would have to rebuild everything. And at some point he just realized it was too much of a job. Well, Michelle wanted her money back. I'm not sure how much she even gave him, but she would hound Scott about this. Even when Nathan was being born at the hospital, Wayne finally said that it was uncalled for and that she needed to back off. It was tasteless. Even Joe thought so. But she just wouldn't stop begging for money. Finally, her dad was like, look, we're letting you live rent-free. You need to chill out. What do you need to worry about? Both her and Joe had both bank accounts filled with upward of $10,000 in each of them. But she felt for some reason she deserved more.
And this became a pattern with Michelle. She would feel slighted over the smallest things, especially when it came to people like Erica. For example, during family gatherings, something minor would set Michelle off and she would blow up, sometimes right in front of her niece and nephew. It got to the point where Erica didn't want her at the house anymore. Michelle wasn't welcome.
And the more Erica pushed back, the more Michelle began to actually hate Erica, even despise her. She felt like she was the enemy. And I think we mentioned this, but Michelle was really insecure about her weight. It was something she brought up a lot, but at the same time, she actually said this to Joe. She said it was disrespectful that Erica had gained weight after she just had 2 children, like pretty much back to back, 3 years apart. She said that her brother deserved somebody who he could come home to after a hard day at work, who was fit and in shape. Wow. Can you believe that?
And Michelle was also pushing away all her friends. She became super paranoid and convinced that everyone was against her. Because of that, she ended up losing the support of the few people she had from childhood. The last of her old friends stopped spending time with her, and that's when Judy started telling her friend Linda and a few others that she was really concerned about Michelle. Her outbursts were getting worse, and her behavior had become more and more erratic over the past year.
Michelle would constantly complain to Joseph about the unfairness that she felt and how it fueled the bitterness inside of her. She was extremely resentful towards her brother Scott because of that deal I told you that he made with the Firebird. But the tension finally reached a breaking point during Easter Sunday dinner that year in 2007, only a few months earlier. Wayne and Judy were frustrated and concerned for their daughter's future, so they staged somewhat of an intervention. They sat Michelle down and they tried to talk to her, to get her to reason with her, and so that she would recognize the damage her bitterness was doing to the relationships with her family.
But Michelle was defiant. She immediately went on the offensive, accusing her parents of favoring Scott and insisting that everything they had done for him was owed to her too. Wayne, exhausted by this constant conflict and feeling like nothing was getting through to her, he made a tough decision. He told Michelle that for the time being, she would be removed from the will. Since she was so concerned about money, she wouldn't get a dime. He also explained that if something were to happen to him or Judy, Scott would be in charge of the family's affairs. It was supposed to be tough love, a sort of wake-up call to push Michelle toward change, but instead of reflecting on it, Michelle took it as another attack. In her mind, it was just more proof that her family was against her, and her anger only grew deeper.
I wanted to mention this quickly, and I don't know if I told you this, John, while we were talking about the case earlier. There was also this time when, Michelle was kind of struggling, and they were all trying to figure out where they could live or what they could do. And this idea popped up, and it was an idea between Scott and Wayne and everybody. And what they were going to do is they were all going to pitch in for a big lot of land that they could put trailers on or they could put homes on, and they were going to all go in on it, right? And the only way that Michelle could have this land was if everyone did their part, right? But eventually it just wasn't a good idea. So they decided not to go along with it. And the reason why Michelle, of all people, felt slighted, and she takes it overboard, was because everyone else already had a house. Mary Victoria was fine. Scott had his thing. Her parents had theirs. And she just felt like she had nothing. And without their help, she wouldn't be able to get it. So now her mind was set on getting everything, basically. Only a couple months before this, Mary Victoria said that she and Michelle took a trip to Monroe together. And when they were coming back, all of a sudden, Michelle starts freaking out and saying that she hates her mom and dad, and she hates her brother, and that she wanted to kill them. Yep. Now, here's the thing. They did not take this seriously. Mary Victoria even told her mom about it. And Michelle had a temper. She would exaggerate things. She would blow things out of proportion. So they kind of thought like, oh, it's just Michelle being Michelle. There were little things that would happen, like Joe would go out of his way to make her some brownies, something that a boyfriend would try to do to make you happy. Well, if there was like a corner burned or something was wrong, she would flip out. It was more than OCD. I also noticed the fact that, I don't know if you noticed this, but I know people get married in Vegas, but Scott and Erica got married in Vegas. And then it was like she wanted to get married in Vegas. I'm guessing her parents were probably telling her, like, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to get married? But to me, it was almost like she wanted her brother's life, or maybe she even wanted to be with her brother, like some weird twisted attraction or something. Like she felt like she deserved someone like him. I don't know. It's weird. And I just want to play something for you all so you can kind of gauge what's going on in this dynamic. You can see this old home video of Christmas Eve past where the family's getting together, and you can kind of see Michelle. We're going to circle her in the background, and she's being really timid as her brother with his all-American look, his blonde hair, his light eyes. He's just having so much fun with Erica, and they're really happy. And Michelle, she just kind of looks like she's hanging around in the background. So you can kind of see this unfolding. If you look at it from the past, you can kind of see that. But then there's this beautiful picture of them from a couple years before all of this happened. They're gathered in the living room. There's Scott sitting in his favorite spot on the couch. Michelle is there. Joe is there. Erica's sitting on the love seat, holding little Olivia. And it looks like everyone's having a great time. But of course, we know that pictures are not real life. They're just a snapshot in time when everyone's asked to smile. That love seat is where Erica would take her last breath, in that same spot. Something evil was behind Michelle's forced smile.
After talking to a few people close to the Anderson family and getting a sense of the family dynamic, especially the tension between Michelle and her brother Scott and Scott's wife Erica, Detective Tompkins decided to press Michelle. He leaned into the good cop approach, acting like he was on her side and being empathetic. He asked if something was going on with her family that was making her feel bad. That's when Michelle broke down. She started crying and she says she loves Scott, but ever since he married Erica, he's hated her.
Yeah, let's listen to her right now.
I love him, but ever since he married Erica, he hates me.
Of course, her brother doesn't hate her. These things are all in her mind. And that's one thing I think that everyone is aware of in this situation, that Michelle is her own worst enemy. She creates things in her mind that are not really happening. And she sees herself as this ultimate victim who should be pitied and babied and given anything she wants. She definitely had the Peter Pan complex. She did not want to grow up. But she was especially concentrated on money. Money. She said it 35 times in her interview. And then, of course, there's the hatred towards Erica. And there's also the greed aspect of Michelle. And now she's telling the detectives that her brother Scott, the one with his own career, who's college educated, who's worked very hard to get where he is in life, almost a decade at one job, now he's in a new position for a successful construction company, he apparently owed her $40,000.
Wow, let's listen to her tell that story.
My brother owes me a lot of money.
Okay.
And he refused to pay me back. And he knows we've been struggling. And my parents they don't even care about it. I wanted the $40,000 back that he owed me.
$40,000. That is a lot of money.
I wanted it back.
I can understand why you were upset.
She actually makes me sick. Wow, 40 grand. Okay, let's divide that by 6. The number of people who are dead. It was actually eerie. I just did that to make a point, but actually came out to 66666 all the way across. That is just evil. It's just a coincidence, but their lives were worth way more than any amount of money. Plus, all the ripple effects of these murders. It's disgusting. Of course, the detectives are just appeasing her. He wants to get her to talk. So he's going along with saying like, oh my goodness, that amount of money would make you really do something you wouldn't normally do. And that's when Detective Sue Peters, who's in the back this whole time watching this unfold, she speaks up. And maybe it was the motherly tone she took about it. She just calmly and kindly, kind of playing the good cop in the situation, says to Michelle, I think you might know a little more about why we're here. You have to talk to Scott and I about that. The cop's name was Scott, by the way. So that could have been a trigger too. Who knows? And before they can even say another sentence, Michelle just starts bawling even more. She put her face in her hands and she starts to say, it's all my fault. I'm so sorry. And now Tompkins changes his tone. Like you said, John, he's empathizing with her. He's quietly asking her, like, tell us what happened at your parents' house. So she starts to explain. Let's listen.
Tell me what happened at your parents' house.
My friends, they kicked me out because they don't believe Scott's a bad person.
Okay.
And I panicked.
And then what happened?
I freaked out. Donna.
So, as you heard, Michelle said she got into an argument with her parents after they threatened to kick her out of the trailer. Part of the issue was that she'd been trying to convince them that Scott was a bad person, but they didn't believe her. For whatever reason, she seemed fixated on making them see Scott in a negative light.
Well, in her own mind, she's got this twisted narrative that everyone's against her, when in reality, she's unhinged.
Right, and she panicked, then went to her truck, got a gun, and shot her family?
And can you believe this? She went on, saying like, I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad person. Well, what do you call someone who kills innocent children and an entire family? Their own family. Oh, wait. And she said it was because they owed her money.
Right. And yeah, Tompkins knew that Michelle was most likely lying. And we'll get more into that as the investigation unfolds. But for this initial interview, from what they gathered was that Michelle had gone to her parents' house, an argument broke out, and it ended with 6 people dead. Michelle claimed it was all her fault and that Joe was innocent. She said they came back to the scene because she felt so guilty she couldn't eat or sleep, and she wanted to confess. But things weren't adding up. There were still so many pieces missing. For one, there were 2 sets of bloody shoe prints and 2 different types of bullets at the scene. It was clear that Joe was holding back something as well.
As a matter of fact, Detective Tompkins gets out of his vehicle, goes over to Detective Pavlovich in his vehicle where Joe is sitting inside, and basically tells him, we've got a woman over here who just admitted to killing her family. So now we got to treat them like suspects. So from now on, the detective is trying to get Joe to admit his part in the crime. And he goes easy on him. He's like, Joe, Michelle told us what happened, that something really bad happened and you witnessed it. But Joe holds to his original story. He says, I don't know what happened. Now I'm going to speed up the timeline a little bit, and we're going to tell you everything that these amazing, talented, professional detectives and scientists, forensic specialists uncovered after these 2 people were arrested, because they were arrested on the spot. They were taken into custody. And while the autopsies were being completed, while all the blood was being swabbed and tested, while all the reconstruction was being done for this entire crime scene, and by the way, I've actually never done a case where their entire living room was reconstructed for the jury later. We're going to get to that, but it was insane. But we want to tell you everything that they uncovered, so you understand step by step just how evil and disgusting and wicked and twisted this case really is. One of the most important aspects to this investigation was understanding the timeline. They wanted to know who was killed first and how each one of them was shot, which direction it came from, and the order of things, because then they could work backwards from that to figure out the motive. Even though, I'm sure you know this, they don't have to prove a motive. It's actually clear Michelle is not in her right mind, and she's guilty of murdering her family. But they don't know what's going on with Joe yet. But they do know that both of them are involved, because when they got arrested, they took both of their shoes from them. And guess what? The ones with the little circles on the sole were Michelle's. She stepped on her dad's back. Can you believe that? And the ones with the ridges were Joe's.
Wow. So let's set the stage. It's Christmas Eve around 12:30 p.m. Michelle and Joe are in the trailer down the road from the Anderson house. Michelle calls her mom Judy to ask when the rest of the family is expected to arrive. Judy is in her craft room wrapping up last-minute gifts to put under the Christmas tree in the den. The tree lights aren't even plugged in yet. It's still early in the day. Judy tells Michelle that no one's expected until around 4 p.m. Michelle knew she had some time to put their plan into motion. She and Joe got dressed as if they were heading over for a normal Christmas Eve visit. They even brought a decoy gift. It was a random taped-up box filled with junk to make it look like they were there to wrap presents. It was all part of their excuse for showing up early.
But what was already wrapped underneath Michelle's sweatshirt was her 9mm handgun. And underneath Joe's arm was his holstered .357 Magnum revolver. He was wearing a jacket on top of it to hide it. Wayne was out in the living room watching TV and sitting on the couch when Michelle and Joe walked in. Now, it was a little earlier than expected, but of course the Andersons love their family, so they're always welcome. Judy was still in the craft room when Joe showed up and walked inside with that decoy box. They exchanged some small talk as she walked into the kitchen to start making side dishes. Michelle offered to help, and the two of them began preparing green bean casserole. It truly seemed like an ordinary, loving family affair. Joe took a seat next to Wayne. Time was ticking by. It was getting closer and closer to the time that the other family members would arrive, and eventually Wayne mentioned to Michelle that she needed to move her truck so that Scott could park in the driveway. As she went towards the door, Joe got up and pulled her aside. He said, "Listen, if you're not going to do this and we're already going to go back to the car, you should either get it over with or we should just leave." She told them they can't leave. They already looked suspicious, and she was going to do it. She moved her truck while Judy was putting the roast into the oven, and she made her way back to the craft room to finish her wrapping. Joe joined her.
And within minutes, a loud bang echoed through the house. Judy turned to Joe and said, "What was that?" Then they heard Wayne shout, "What the hell?" Judy and Joe rushed out of the craft room into the kitchen, only to see Michelle standing behind the couch where Wayne had been sitting. She had her 9mm pointed at his head. She had already fired once, but missed. She tried to fire again, but the gun jammed. Wayne jumped and ran toward Michelle, who was now standing in the dining room. Judy and Joe were in the kitchen. Judy started screaming as Joe pulled his gun from its holster. He ran towards Wayne, fired a shot, but missed. In the chaos, Wayne ran straight into the dining room table and fell to the ground. Joe walked up, pointed the barrel of his gun at Wayne's forehead, and fired a single fatal shot. The blood swab from the area after LCV was sprayed confirmed it was Wayne's, marking the spot where he died. His autopsy revealed that the bullet exited through the back of his skull. The stippling on his forehead showed that it was a point-blank shot. He looked directly into the eyes of his killer. Judy was screaming, completely in shock. She knew exactly what was happening. Her own daughter and her daughter's boyfriend had just killed the man she's been married to for over 30 years. And now they were coming for her. Panicking, she ran for her life. She made it into the kitchen near the sink, but Joe was right behind her. He didn't hesitate. He fired a shot, but it barely grazed her, hitting the kitchen wall and landing in the laundry room. Later analysis of that bullet showed microscopic fibers that matched Judy's sweater. Trapped in a corner in the front of the fridge with nowhere to go, Judy crouched down, looking up at Joe. She raised her arm in a desperate attempt to shield herself and pleaded, "No, no." But Joe just whispered, "I'm sorry," and fired. The first shot hit her forehead and the second struck her chest. Judy slumped down in the front of the fridge, blood pooled behind it, and when it was swabbed, it matched Judy's DNA, confirming that this was where she died.
And if all of that is not evil enough, these heartless monsters wanted everyone dead, so that Michelle would be the only heir to everything the Andersons had. They thought Mary Victoria, her children, and Scott and Erica and their 2 kids would be there soon. Remember how Michelle even asked in the background of that phone call the day before if Mary Victoria was going to be there? This woman figured that she would get rid of her entire family and everything would be hers. The farm, the buildings, everybody's money. She thought she would be the only Anderson left. So what did they do? Well, over the next 2.5 hours, they cleaned everything. After Joe picked up Judy's body and put it in the shed, him and Michelle tried to drag her father into the backyard. Joe had attempted to move him by himself, but he was too heavy. He needed Michelle's help. They dragged him across the yard, but he was too big to fit inside the shed. They tried to lift him, Michelle pulling him from under his arms, Joe from his ankles, but it was no use. They had to leave him right there in the ground. They covered him with the AstroTurf because the dogs were freaking out at the sight of their owner lying dead on the ground. It is just sick to me. They spent a long time trying to make the house look presentable for when poor Scott and Erica walked through that door with their 2 young children excited to see their grandparents and open presents that night.
Around 4 p.m., Scott, Erica, Olivia, and Nathan arrived at that house. Michelle answered the door, acting like everything was completely normal. The roast was still in the oven and snacks were laid out on the coffee table just like any other family Christmas Eve. Michelle and Joe welcomed them inside. Scott, Erica, and the kids had no idea what they were walking into. They had no clue that Wayne and Judy were lying just 100 feet away outside with wounds in their bodies. The house still had a faint metallic smell in the air, the lingering scent of gunfire and blood, but nothing that would immediately raise suspicion.
It's always in these moments when I'm researching and reading stories like this that I wish that I could somehow travel back in time and warn this family not to go inside, because it's so sad for me to think about this holiday, how they took off their shoes, that Scott sat on the couch in his favorite spot. Erica was on the love seat. The kids are running around, they're eating snacks, and they're waiting for Grandma and Grandpa. And after a little while, Scott actually asked Joe and Michelle, like, where's Mom and Dad? Judy was always running around. She was usually in the kitchen. I mean, her presence would be obvious. So it definitely struck Scott as odd that he hadn't even heard his family or seen his mom and dad. And maybe at this point he did get suspicious. Maybe Michelle and Joe were acting different. I mean, they had just killed 2 people. Joe was sitting on the recliner to the right of Scott, and he told him his dad was in back. And Michelle said their mom was in the bathroom. Michelle was standing up in front of the couch and now holding Joe's .357 Magnum under her sweatshirt, which was balled up in her arms. She was using the revolver so that she wouldn't have any jamming issues. Sure, there was some small talk back and forth, with Scott telling them about his new project he was working on. Both he and Erica took off their shoes, got cozy, not knowing what was to come. Out of nowhere, Michelle turned to her brother Scott and asked, "Where's my money?" Scott had been hearing this for years. So at first, he just gave her the look like, again. Then he said, "I don't know what you're talking about, Michelle." He was thinking like, how many times am I going to have to do this, you know? And that she would eventually let it go. But this time was different.
Michelle drops the sweatshirt and without warning fires a shot at Scott just as he charges at her like a football player. He crouches low and barrels towards her, tackling her to the ground. The bullet hits him under the chin, traveling down through his neck and into his chest. And now Michelle is on her back with her knees to her chest, holding the gun against her stomach, pointing it straight ahead. Scott is on top of her, kneeling on the floor, still trying to protect his family, who's only a few feet away. Joe steps in and tries to wrestle the gun away from Michelle, but she refuses to let go. By then, she's out of bullets. Joe tried to pull Scott off Michelle, but his finger accidentally went right into Scott's neck wound. When he realized Scott had been shot, he freaked out and yelled, "Where's the 9mm?" Michelle had hidden that in the kitchen cabinet. While Joe ran to get it, Michelle kicked Scott, causing him to fall backwards. By this point, he was getting weaker, lying on his back, paralyzed and unable to move, but he was still alive.
And that is sad because Scott could probably hear and possibly even see what was happening, but couldn't do anything to stop it. The children are now screaming and huddling in front of their mother, who's trapped in the living room in front of the love seat, watching her husband bleed out on the floor, knowing that she's going to be next, knowing how unhinged Michelle is, knowing there's probably nothing she's going to be able to do. But her mother always taught her from a very young age, like many of us, to dial 911 for help. So you better believe that Erica was looking around to try to see where that phone was. She saw it on a small side table, and she had to wait for the right moment to reach for it. That moment came when Michelle was trying to reload the revolver and Joe ran to get the 9mm. Erica's priority was keeping her children safe. Joe came back and he unjammed the 9mm, and as he did, a shot was fired, but it went through the TV, cracking the screen. This scene was chaotic. Everything was happening very fast, even though the way we explain it sounds like there was step 1, step 2. No, it was just a chaotic scene. Erica had managed to get to the phone and she did dial 911, but it was too late. Joe came up, he grabbed the phone from her hands, he looked down and he could see the phone screen and the number she dialed. Then he heard the operator say, "Hello?" But he didn't know how to end the call. There were too many buttons on the phone, so he ran to the other room while trying to take out the battery. Meanwhile, Michelle was standing in front of Erica, who is now in front of the love seat with both of her children to her sides. Michelle fired several shots in her direction. Erica was hit in the thighs and the hip area and also in the abdomen. Erica screamed, "No, please, not the kids." This was caught on the 911 call before Joe was able to remove the battery. And it is so sad because Pam later identified that voice on the phone to be her daughter, Erica. Joe then threw the battery on the ground and the call hung up. And Erica screamed, "Why are you doing this?" Michelle told her, "Because you hate me. You've always hated me." And Erica pleaded with her saying, "No, we love you. Please don't do this. You don't have to do this." Poor Olivia had already been struck by one of the bullets that hit Erica, and she was now bleeding from her head. Erica was still clutching onto her when Joe said, "I'm sorry," and shot her right between the eyes. He said it was so she wouldn't have to watch her children die. She slumped down, and Olivia ended up underneath her. Joe shot Olivia again to make sure she was dead. Little Nathan was standing in front of his mother. His head was against her chest, and he had found the phone battery on the floor. This made me cry. Like, it was so sad. You know, he's a 3-year-old. He found the little battery, and he looked up at Joe, and he gently just handed it to him. And Joe just took it from him and threw it on the ground. And Nathan looked up at Joe, who later told the investigators that Nathan looked at him like he knew what was going to happen. And he had accepted that he was going to die. And that is so sad and sickening to me. Joe shot Nathan in the head, and the bullet went through and penetrated into Erica's chest. This bullet caused what's called a kissing wound. It's when 2 wounds are in 2 different people, and it's caused by the same instrument because they were both hit with that bullet. And during Erica's autopsy, they found a portion of her son's skull and his hair inside of her chest wound. How heartbreaking is that? And after that, they were like, "Okay, let's just get out of here."
Poor Erica suffered the most wounds out of anyone, which makes sense given how much Michelle hated her. 3 generations of the Anderson family were gone in a matter of hours.
I think the hardest part for me to hear, it all was very hard to hear, but during the autopsy of the children, when the doctor reported that Nathan was still wearing a diaper, none of these people should have died, but especially not the children.
After that, Joe turned off the oven, but the roast was already burnt. And Michelle went through her brother's wallet looking for cash. She didn't find any, so she put it back and moved on to her mom's purse, where she took $40. Then she left the scene in her truck with Joe locking the gate behind them. As they were driving off, they passed the responding officers who had shown up to check on the 911 call. From there, they headed north, driving about 60 miles to toss the guns in the Stilgwamash River. They claimed that they were on their way to Vegas, or so they said.
But Vegas was actually in the other direction. And it was later found that they left the death scene, but then later returned and actually showered back at the Andersons' residence. And Joe took the time to pick up evidence, move things. He moved the bodies of Nathan, Erica, and Olivia because he was searching for bullets and shell casings. So he was moving the couches and the love seat, attempting to get rid of evidence. Who knows how long they stayed there with those dead bodies. But when the truck was searched, they found receipts inside the center console that showed the direction the couple went in after committing this heinous crime. At some point, they did go to that river, which was only about an hour and a half away. So they had to do something in between that time that they left the river, and 10:45 p.m. when they stopped for gas at a Shell station in Monroe, which was only 18 miles away from Carnation. They did continue south, and then the day after Christmas, they stopped for gas on December 26th at 7:52 a.m. at a Safeway in Kelso, Washington, 144 miles south of Carnation. That's 3 hours away. But then 3 hours later, they were back up north again in Carnation at another gas station, only 26 minutes away. So they were just, in the investigators' minds, driving aimlessly. Like they had no intention to go to Vegas. That was just a made-up story. On the way back to the scene, they stopped at the bank. Michelle walked in and made a payment on her truck for $306.23. There's actually a video of her just nonchalantly walking into Bank of America wearing all black with those same boots that she walked through the blood in like it's an ordinary day. Like she was just making a payment on her car. She wrote a check and left. And that's when they pulled up to the scene. The investigators don't believe for a minute that she had any intention of coming back to the scene to confess. Not at all. They believe, and so do I, that she was hoping that she was going to be the one to stumble upon the 6 members of her own family dead, pretending that she went there to surprise them about getting married. And then she was going to act like the victim, like, oh my God, I found my family dead. I can't believe this happened. But she didn't expect the loyal best friend, Linda. Linda ruined all of those plans.
So I know you may think that, okay, now that we know what happened, the story's over, but it's not.
No, because so many infuriating things happened in this case, and it didn't even go to trial until years later. Joe's trial was first. Now, we are not going to go into detail, but I do want to touch on a few important things and let you listen to a few things. First of all, Michelle and Joe told so many versions of this story, and really the investigators had to piece it all together on their own. The truth was somewhere in everything they said, right? The truth is always in the middle somewhere. And they did such an extensive recreation of the actual crime scene. They recreated this entire crime scene for Michelle's trial. And we're going to get to that later because it was down to the millimeter. They had the same exact rug, the love seat, the couch, the coffee table, and they set everything up just like it was on the night of Christmas Eve so that these jurors could visualize what it was like to sit in that living room like a fly on the wall during these killings.
First, before the trials 4 years after the murders, a young boy named Jared Sinema and his brother, who lived on a dairy farm, were hanging out with a friend near the Stillaguamish River. While they were there, they noticed something sticking out of the muddy riverbank. Jared pulled on it and realized it was the .357 Magnum. He turned it in to the police, and it was later linked to the Anderson murder. The other gun was never found.
That's right. That did happen a few years before. And then Joe's trial happened on December 19th, 2014. And then Michelle's trial happened January 2016. The court presented everything we already talked about through tons of forensic analysis, whether that was blood spatter, trajectory, the DNA, bullets, everything. I mean, the autopsy reports, interviews with the people who knew the Andersons, as well as people who knew Joe and Michelle. And in Joe's case, the defense painted him as a manipulated and damaged man who was only trying to be there for the woman that he loved. Joe had a chance to speak at his trial. I mean, every defendant is given the opportunity to take the stand, and he did. And I have to say, I mean, you heard me listening to him. I guess he was probably on the stand for at least 3 days. I mean, I watched hours and hours of his testimony. And I do think it's important for you to at least hear and see how Joe sounds, his mannerisms, because it is really clear to me he's challenged. I don't know. I'm not licensed or qualified as a doctor to diagnose what could be wrong with him. He could be on the spectrum. He could maybe have a lower IQ. Although to me, he does seem very smart and articulate. But as he is about to explain, he has what's called a tongue tie in his mouth, and it was never treated. He can't pronounce the R's correctly in words. And that alone, coupled with his quiet voice, it made him very insecure from a young age. He even would call it an accent to make it less embarrassing. And I have to feel bad. I mean, I do feel bad for that part. But let's listen to him while his attorney asks him a few initial questions.
McEnroe, where do you live?
I live at 505th Avenue, Seattle, Washington, 98104.
And what is that facility you live in?
That is the King County Correctional Facility. That is the King County Jail.
Why are you there?
For the morals of 6 people.
And are you guilty of that? Is there any question that you are guilty of murder?
There is no question of that. I did do this awful thing, yes.
One thing I noticed right away is that he said sorry hundreds of times. Over and over again. I'm sorry for the mic. I'm sorry for my voice. I'm sorry for speaking. It's so obvious to me that he's easily influenced by other people. You know, he's so meek. And in his case, it was Michelle, a woman who gave him attention, probably for her own selfish plan from the beginning, because she was planning to kill her family for years. And that came out in Joe's testimony. And I do believe a lot of what he told the court.
Right, and he's upfront about how his family was Mormon growing up, which meant there could be a lot of things that he wasn't allowed to do, including masturbation. He's pretty candid about how, as a teenager, he struggled to follow that rule. Overall, he's very open about his life throughout his testimony.
Right. I mean, and to admit that to an entire court, and we're gonna play the clip where he does, you can kind of tell, I don't think he can lie. It's almost like he has like diarrhea of the mouth. Like he'll just say anything that comes into his head. Not to say he's not capable of lying, but to me, I did believe a lot of his testimony was very genuine. So let's play that clip and show you how he apologizes profusely and even giggles when someone's phone goes off. So you can kind of tell his social skills, they're not really appropriate in the moment. And you can tell that he struggles with that at trial.
Mr. McEnroe, if I could ask you to push
sorry.
the microphone a little bit further away from you. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead, sir.
Sorry, I'm not very good at public speaking. Sorry. Luminances are a very conservative sect. And
A very
conservative sect. No holidays, no rock music, no soap operas. This is fun to go off like say in front of a room full of people. No masturbation. It was being a teenage boy that was actually the one that I ended up breaking. And so when the elders asked if I had a clear conscience, I couldn't say that I did because
Because you've been masturbating?
because I am a wank, yes.
Because I'm.
A wank. W-A-N-K-U.
But I can't.
Speak up again, sir. I'm sorry. One second, Joe.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Somebody's got the rumba going. Sorry.
Just wait a second, Joe, please.
I was.
It's okay.
Sorry to draw attention to
It's
you like
okay.
that.
Just let the record reflect there was just a cell phone going off. No big deal.
Yeah.
Just had to take a break for a minute.
Sorry. Yeah.
And he isn't heartless either. I mean, you would think with everything that he's done that he's just like this cold person. But at one point, they asked him about his granddad. And apparently while he was in prison, his granddad died. And you do see him get a little emotional here.
I think the answer was that he died while I was here, and I wasn't able to even really write him and say, look, I'm sorry. Sorry about letting him down too. Because
Okay.
it let me down.
So,
He also has a lot of fears, including driving. I think irrational fears were a huge part of Joe and Michelle's life.
Yes, a huge issue in their lives. And I'm pretty sure this was something they connected on before they even met in person. They both had very irrational views of the world, almost like they lived in a fantasy world. And remember, they met in a fantasy writing group. Well, I'm going to tell you, this extended into their real lives. They were not well. They thought that the apocalypse was going to happen. I mean, not that we know whether one is going to come or not, but in their minds, it's like it was them against the world. They constantly thought they were in battle with their strangers, so much so they couldn't even sleep together because they had to take shifts in their apartment. One person would sleep and the other person would have to be up with a sword all night because they thought they were under attack.
His attorney and Joe himself explained how Michelle had groomed him over the years. She manipulated him into believing that her parents were the enemy and her brother was evil, and even the kids were dark entities.
Exactly. And this is the part that reminded me of the Lori Vallow case because that's a crazy case. But in this case, Michelle had somehow convinced Joe that Scott's kids were corrupted and everyone was going to die anyway. So in order to make sure that the children were reborn again into a better situation, they had to be killed. It was just so twisted. I mean, I could go on and on. There were so many instances where I was just like, oh my gosh. But at one point, his attorney's like, why didn't you just tell one of the detectives that you killed them because, they were dark entities? And he's like, because it was easier to just say we wanted to get rid of them because they were witnesses, because if I would have told them about dark entities, they would have thought I was crazy.
So were you trying to mislead Detective Pavlovich?
No.
Well, then why didn't you tell him the truth?
It's the truth that that she was concerned that they were getting corrupted and turning into, dark entities.
Dark entities?
Then I'd have to explain what that means and all that comes with it, and sound like I'm out of my mind.
But if that was the truth, why not just tell it to him?
Because that doesn't matter.
Listening to hours and hours of his testimony actually numbed my brain. But I also began to understand what he went through. And I am not saying that this man is a victim, but he's a victim of certain circumstances that he was in. That I can say. But you might be thinking, like the prosecution was and even asked him, why don't you just leave? I think it is the typical domestic situation where over time, someone just becomes, what do they call that? Stockholm syndrome, babe, where you are in love with your captor.
That's Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah. And he felt like he had to protect her. But Michelle was also very damaged. She was a broken person. And in her case, I feel like she was suffering from something more like schizophrenia. Again, not trying to diagnose, but she was super paranoid, so much so. Okay, I'm not going to explain this in detail, but they couldn't even simply walk out to their car and go to work. They had an entire routine for just getting in their vehicle. She had to park the truck only a foot away from their trailer. This is when they were living in a trailer park aside from their parents' property. And for whatever reason that I could not understand from his testimony, they didn't want the neighbors to know that both of them were leaving. They wanted someone to always think there was someone home at the house. So they would crawl on the ground to the car, and then they would open up the doors at the same time and get in. And then they would look at each other and they would go 1, 2, 3, and they would close both doors at once so that neighbors would only hear one click and they would think that only one person was in the truck. And then Joe had to hide until they got up. Babe, I mean, guys, this is beyond extreme. It's it's not normal. Okay, so you can imagine how weird their life was because they were so paranoid.
He also had imaginary friends. He learned it from the movie Fight Club. His main spirit guide was Crow, but he had Melissa, God, Void, and they were all parts of him and would try to talk him in and out of doing things.
The spirit guides Dr. Dutton talked about were who again? Crow?
Crow, Melissa, God, he also loved him that, but God's obviously not a spirit guide. And he also mentioned Void and the other, except neither of those are actually spirit guides.
Void and the other are not spirit guides?
No, they're just parts of me.
They're parts of you?
Yeah.
So they're fragments of you?
Yes.
So is Crow a fragment of you?
I'm not actually sure what he is. What his actual origin is. All I know is that he's there as a sort of a guardian to keep me from doing stupid things.
Why? Why did you do that?
The reason is I thought I had to.
Why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you?
I would have. If it was left to me, I absolutely would have. I wanted to just leave. I mean, I'm not a confrontational person. I don't like hurting people or fighting or even arguing. I just don't. And I would have, if it had been up to me, I would have just left.
You don't like hurting people, but you killed or house killed 6 people, right?
Yeah, I did. I didn't want to, but I did, because I thought I had to.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean the last word.
I'm sorry, I did because I thought I had to. And yeah, I know that's not a very good excuse, but I'm not trying to excuse myself. I'm just trying to explain my actions. Sorry. That doesn't mean it was right. That means that that's what I thought had to happen. And
Okay, so let's talk.
I'm walking off of the fact that I believe, not off of the fact of reality.
You what, Joe?
I was walking off of off of the reality she was selling me, not off of any real reality. And it's just like, I didn't want this to happen. I wanted to go, but she's like, no, I have to do this.
When did you realize that wasn't the real reality?
As we're driving off and everybody's dead.
He tried to explain that everything he did, including the massacre, happened in the reality that he was living in, not in real reality. And he knew the difference somehow, but, didn't stop it, right?
But he did know right from wrong.
Yes, he did. And that's why he said sorry before shooting everyone. He even said that they weren't trying to bait a trap for Scott and his family after killing Judy and Wayne. It was just that they shouldn't have left them there like that. That's why he moved the bodies. And he went a little crazy when he talked about this part, because I think he truly did care about Michelle's parents. Yet, he killed them for her, and he breaks down.
And she's just no help at all. She's just running around. And so end up having to go, but I'm like, okay, so what do we do? Okay, we need to get rid of this. We can't just leave this here. Why can't we just leave it? Because we can't just leave it there. Is it to go off like beta trap? No, it's because we can't just leave it there.
Is it
We can't. Is it to beta trap? No, it's because we can't just leave these dead people here. Okay. So I moved. So I went and moved Judy first. I put a bag over her head because I couldn't look at her because of see the emptiness where she should be. So I moved her out the back door.
I mean, she was such a bad shot that Joe ended up basically shooting everyone for her. And I think that was her plan all along, but that's just me. I think she knew that he would come to her rescue. The point of him taking the stand was to show his humanity so that the jury could spare him the death penalty.
At the end, he tried to tell the jurors that the shootings were fast, and he said, at least nobody suffered. What about their family members who were left behind?
Yeah, what about Erica's mother, who so beautifully and gracefully carried herself throughout all of this? There was definitely suffering.
And yeah, some of them might have died instantly, but I don't think it's not without suffering. Like, we don't know.
Exactly. Like, even if someone supposedly gets shot and they should have died instantly, like, nobody was there with a watch or like that really rubbed me the wrong way. I did not like hearing him say that.
I mean, Scott was still alive on the floor.
Exactly. And all the suffering it caused everyone else. They found him guilty of 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, and they did spare him from the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I feel like Michelle's trial was a little more intense. They reconstructed, as I said, this entire crime scene, and I want to show you, we're going to show it on the screen right here. I mean, the jurors were sitting in front of this crime scene when they reenacted everything. The blood was still on the curtains. They really painted a picture to these jurors to explain exactly what happened that evening.
They had about 3,000 people come forward for jury duty, and I think they broke it down to about 700 and then just kept whittling it down from there.
Exactly. And I highly, highly, highly encourage you to do some reading. If you like reading, I have a book for you because I read it. I'm still kind of reading the ending, but it's what it's like to be on a juror of this exact case that we just talked about. Download the Kindle version, or you can get the regular version of the book. It's called Banquet of Consequences, A Juror's Plight. The Carnation murder trial of Michelle Anderson, A Juror's Perspective. I know that's a mouthful. I'm going to put it up on the screen. I'm going to link it wherever I can. It is intense because now you know the story. So you should really read the book. I kind of wish I had like a book club where we could all discuss it later because it's crazy. For example, the jurors don't know what happened in Joe's trial. They don't know his testimony, all the details that like we know now. So when you're listening to what they're going back and forth on in the jury room, you're kind of getting frustrated because they were going and they were nitpicking like, okay, well, is it first degree for Judy when it comes to Michelle? Is it first degree for, her dad when it comes to Michelle? Like, did she want her mom dead? Did she want her dad dead? Did she want Scott dead? And I was sitting there going, oh my gosh, if they only knew the things that I already know about this case. Like, yes, she wanted the children dead. But anyway, I'm not going to ruin the book for you. But it was just frustrating for me because I was like, but it does give you a really in-depth understanding of what jurors have to go through. And we learned in the Dan Markel case, it doesn't matter who was holding the gun. It doesn't matter like what unfolds once it happens. If you conspire with someone to kill someone, and they do, you're responsible for the same amount of that crime. Does that make sense? This was all Michelle's plan. It was Michelle's life. It was Michelle's family. And it was Michelle's fault. And I can actually say that I hate this woman. I hate her. I hate people like her. She is a spoiled brat. And I don't just want to blame parents because you know what? They had other kids that didn't become murderers. But she was a brat. Even at her trial, I have to play this because she even fought with the judge. She would have these outbursts, just like her mom had said, like, oh, Michelle has these outbursts. You're going to see one right here because she doesn't like her lawyers. It reminded me so much of Sarah Boone, but like times 10.
The right for counsel of choice that I can hire with my own funds. And I just want you to know that you cannot deny somebody that.
Okay, ma'am, all I asked you was whether or not you wanted to testify.
I want new attorneys and I want to be represented up there.
That's not answering my question.
It's illegal to have me testify without effective assistance of counsel.
Ma'am, my question is this. Do you wish to testify or not?
Yes, I'm going to tell you in front of the jury that I do not have effective assistance of counsel. So my rights are being violated. It has to be on the court record so I can have this appeal. You can't deny someone their constitutional right to counsel of choice with their own funds. You can't deny somebody that and retain your job on the bench. You understand that, right?
I'm asking you one simple question. Do you wish to testify in your own defense?
I wish to stand up there and tell the jury that I've been denied that constitutional right.
Well, if that's the extent of the testimony you wish to give to the jury, I'm not going to let you do that because that's not really relevant to their question on guilt or innocence. Those are other issues that we've already vetted many times over.
But you didn't allow me the ability to defend myself or resolve the problem, and you violated my civil rights against choice of counsel. So you can't keep your job when you do things like that. There's disciplinary steps. You can't deny somebody's constitutional rights.
Do you wish to testify in your own defense with regard to the crime itself?
With effective assistance of counsel. I am unrepresented because they cannot take their personal bias out of the picture. I went against my own best interest to stop talking to them because I had to protect myself from their malpractice, and you're blaming me. They're abusive at the meetings, so I can't go to those. They lie to me, so we're not getting things effective counsel. I bring it up in court, and you deny my ability to have avenues to correct the problem.
It's my job to rule on issues. I've ruled on these issues many times over. I know you disagree with the rulings, but those are over with now.
But I disagree with my constitutional rights being violated.
Your Honor, can we have just a second?
If you wish, counsel, go right ahead.
How does she have the audacity to challenge the judge like that?
I don't know. Like, she's basically telling him, like, you're fired. And it's kind of laughable because it's so embarrassing.
Right. It's all about Michelle.
Exactly. And now you can see why she wanted to kill her parents because it's like, woe is me all the time. It makes me sick.
Michelle Anderson was found guilty of 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison in April of 2016. Good riddance.
Exactly. Good riddance. Goodbye. I hope you never see the light of day.
It's wild, the types of people that you can meet online. Be careful.
It is. Honestly, you still have to be careful. I'm about to be doing a case. I don't like to spoil things, but I'm about to do a case that has like haunted me. Another one about dating apps. I mean, look, it's not all bad. You're going to find scary, evil people everywhere. But I think it just adds a layer because it's more of a mystery of who you are talking to. And from the get-go, if people are lying and, you know, they have reasons for that, right? They might not be like as drastic as these reasons. But I do want to say I'm going to link below videos of Joe, the book, the trial from Law and Crime, because 8 years ago, they did cover this entire trial as far as I could see. Like they covered a lot of Michelle's, a lot of Joe's. So all of that will be down there for you. And I hope you do watch all of it because you could, you know, have something to do when we're not posting because I'm sick and we may miss a week. Who knows?
So thanks for watching our video and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you so much. Bye.